Tonight, Wesley So flirts with a woman mid-game.
And he's there, and Nepo's like, well, what do you want from me?
I think Nepo is just, what? Why did you give me a point here? I don't get it. What?
Wow. Absolutely insane stuff.
Daniel Naroditsky reads an excerpt from his latest erotic novel.
Basic stuff, and Jan is, I'm sure, castrating himself on the inside.
And 8 chess players laugh at a chessboard. I hope you enjoyed those 3 little clips that took place during the Fischer Random World Championship 2022 in Reykjavik, Iceland last month. As you can see on the screen, these are the 8 players who were taking part. We had Nodirbek Abdusatorov, world rapid champion, I believe, from last year. Jan Nepomniachtchi, Wesley So, Gretarsson, a grandmaster from Iceland, Magnus Carlsen, of course, Hikaru, Vladimir Fedoseev, very strong grandmaster from Russia, and Matthias Blubaum from Germany. So Fischer Random was created by Bobby Fischer in the 1990s, I believe, where the pawns stay where they are on the board because they can't really be shuffled, but all the other pieces on the back rank are put in a random order. And it's often called Fischer 960 because apparently there's 960 different ways that the pieces can be shuffled for both sides. And these games were played over rapid play time control. I think it was 25 minutes plus 10 seconds per move or something like that. And there was a qualification period for the players in between August and October. And these were the 8 players that qualified to take part in the finals. And they were divided into 2 groups, and as we can see, after a double round robin, Nodirbek Abdusatorov won with 10 points, and Nepo came second in Group A. So Wesley So and Gretarsson were eliminated. Wesley So was defending champion, but he was in a pretty strong group with Nodirbek and Nepo. And in Group B, we had the 2 heavyweights, Magnus and Hikaru, and they went through with 9 points each, and Fedoseev and Blubaum were both eliminated. So then we moved on to a semi-finals where, for some reason, it's not mentioned here on the chess.com website, but Magnus actually lost to Jan Nepomniachtchi, which is a bit of a surprise. Potentially part of Magnus's slightly weaker form recently. We can only speculate about the reasons for that. And Hikaru defeated the previously unbeaten Nodirbek in the semi-final. And then in the playoffs, Blubaum finished 7th, Gretarsson was 8th, Fedoseev surprisingly beat Wesley So to finish in 5th place, and Magnus defeated Nodirbek to finish in 3rd to take the bronze medal. And then we had the grand final between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hikaru Nakamura. And I thought it would be a good idea to show you one of the games from that grand final. And I think the title on the thumbnail has kind of spoiled who the winner will be, but let's find out what happened. So the first 4 games between Hikaru and Nepo finished in a 2-2 draw, including a very quick draw in Game 4. So that led us into an Armageddon playoff. In this playoff, Nepo had 13 minutes as black and Hikaru had 15 minutes as white. And the advantage for Nepo in this time difference was that if it's a draw, then he wins. And that's how Armageddon playoffs work. So as you can see in this position, the bishops are in the corners of the board, which kind of makes it obvious that you need to start pushing the B and the G pawns to open up those bishops early on. So we start with B3, B6. So both bishops on the A file are opened up, laser beaming across the board straight away. And then we have E4, E5, almost like a typical opening, but there are no typical openings in Fischer Random. G3, G6, opening up the other 2 bishops straight away. Although they're both biting on granite on the E4 and E5 pawns right now, so not much use at the moment. F4, trying to open up the position and the H1 bishop at the start. F5, like look at this, the pawns coming together on the E and F file straight away, competing for the center. We have an exchange of pawns in the center, and then another exchange, and now all 4 bishops are staring at each other. So the question is, who's going to take what, and what bishop's going to be left on the board at the start. So Nepo decides to take the bishop on H1, and Hikaru takes the bishop on E5, which leads us to have opposite colored bishops straight away. Usually in endgame, this means that it's heading for a draw, but this early on, it creates an imbalance and leads us to quite an interesting game, which is quite a brave decision for Nepo to make, considering all he needs in this game is a draw. But hey ho, we start with an imbalance. So Nepo takes the pawn back, and we're back to equal material. And Stockfish says it's slightly better for white, but presumably that's just because white made the first move, as always. Now the queens are looking at each other straight away. With a few more moves, a few more developing moves. Nepo brings his queen to the edge of the board to attack the pawn on h2. Hikaru defends. And then, so we have a bit more development. Knight onto e2, threatening to come to f4 to attack the queen. And now we can see Hikaru is stockpiling all his forces on the f-file, going for that f5 pawn. But there's not a lot happening right now, and as you can see, the evaluation bar has come back to pretty much dead equal at this stage. Hikaru needs to win this game, and he has more time, but there's not a lot happening so far. Although white hasn't castled either, so we'll have to see what happens with the castling in this game. Nepo moves his king forward to b7. He decides he doesn't need to castle. He's just going to keep his king safe by moving it into this little gap on b7, so that he can connect his rooks and get them moving onto the king side of the board. And Hikaru decides he needs to do something, so he strikes in the middle with d4, threatening d5 to fork the c6 and the bishop on c6 and the knight on e6. And now Nepo comes forward, knight g4. Forcing Hikaru to do something. So Hikaru takes the pawn on f5, and it's at this moment that Nepo had his biggest advantage in this game, because if he plays queen h6 here, as you can see, the knight on e3 is pinned by the queen and is also attacked by the knight on g4. And here Hikaru could take the knight on g4. Nepo can then take the knight on e3, but actually a better move is to play rook g8, and then the queen gets harassed for a little while, and actually it doesn't have any really safe squares. She can go to f5, but can get attacked by the rook on b8 sliding across. And yeah, the best move is actually just to give up the queen here, because otherwise you're going to lose the rook on f1. So, but Nepo didn't see all of that. He didn't play queen h6. I guess the time limit is quite quick in these games, so mistakes happen. So in this game, Nepo decides to just swap the queens, which seems perfectly logical as well. Hikaru takes back, and Nepo grabs the pawn on h2. So now we're 15 moves into the game, and Nepo seems pretty comfortable, slightly better according to the engine, and has quite active pieces as well. And White's rook on b1 can't get into the game yet because he hasn't castled or moved the king to b2. So Black's doing pretty well at this point. e1, rook f8, looking for the open file for Black. Hikaru moves his knight out of the way, and now Nepo centralizes the bishop onto a good square for the bishop there, controlling pretty much all of the white squares of the board. d5, knight g5, threatening the knight to come into f3 and connect those knights together. We have knight f4 from Hikaru, rook e8. And now finally Hikaru does move the king. He just copies Nepo's idea from earlier, moves on to b2, and finally can get that b1 rook into the game. And now Hikaru just keeps pushing. He needs to win this game, so he plays d6. It's sacrificing a pawn, but weakening Black's structure at the same time. Nepo decides not to take this gift and just plays c6 instead, leaves the pawn on d6 as a weakness in itself. Knight c4, so now the rooks are looking at each other. And then we swap off the knight and the bishop, and Hikaru's king is coming even further forward, but we're in the end game now pretty much, so it doesn't matter too much. And it's at this point that Nepo starts making some some poor choices. He moves the bishop to g4, which is fine. The bishop is still guarded by the knight on h2 from the attack from the knight on e5. But after rook e3, where does the knight on h2 go? Because it can't go to f3 any longer. f3, excuse me. So where's that knight going to go? So black guards the bishop with h5, so to set up moving the knight somewhere, because it doesn't need to be stuck guarding the bishop on g4 anymore. But we have rook e1, and now the knight really just can't go anywhere at all. And in this moment, if black played a move like a5, for example, then white could take the bishop and would win material here, because if knight takes, then we lose. Black loses a rook, or if we swap the rooks, then you can take back with the knight, and you would just lose a knight. So black has to be careful in this position. So black decides to sacrifice an exchange, although it looks on the surface like black will get the material back. After rook takes knight and rook takes rook, we have knight f3. And it looks like the exchange is going to be won back with the fork, but Hikaru has rook e8. And if black takes this rook, then white can take the rook on f8, and white would be an exchange up. So Nepo clearly missed that, and he played rook f6 just to attack that pawn on d6. We have rook h1, and then Nepo grabs that pawn back. So Nepo's only down 1 point of material, technically, and as long as he holds on, if he can try to hold on to this h pawn, or if he can grab this g pawn, there's a good chance it'll be a draw. We have rook g8, and then rook d2, threatening, well, we're going to set up a threat on that c2 pawn eventually. Hikaru grabs the h pawn, and now we have the threat on c2, and Hikaru does an ugly looking move, rook c1, just to guard it passively, but it's the best move. We don't want to give up the pawn in this position, so just, puts the rook on c1 and defends it there. Rook h2, attacking the knight. The knight jumps over to g7, attacking the bishop, forcing it away. And now the knight goes into e8, giving it two potential squares to come to on d6 and f6. Rook h6 to stop that. Hikaru puts the rook on a more open file. And now we have d5. So as you can see, Nepo is quite strong on this side of the board still, with 4 pawns there. Have the potential to attack that open white king, potentially. Hikaru tries to swap rooks, Nepo declines. Now we have knight d6, and then that bishop is just taken off the board. Hikaru has more material, so when you have more material in the endgame, it's usually better just to get rid of the pieces that's on there. Hikaru defends the pawn, and now attacks the pawn on e5, and Nepo defends. And now, finally, that rook that was stuck on b1 for so long in this game is becoming active. It's gone to h1, and soon it'll be coming to h7 or h6 and attacking Nepo's king. We have b5, giving the king an extra escape square. a3 to stop that pawn coming forward further, or just to play b4 later. Check. King moves back, and Nepo attacks Hikaru's rook. Rook h7. The king goes to the only square, otherwise it would probably be checkmate very soon, down the back rank. And now we have the pigs on the 7th from Hikaru, which is never good for the opposition. That black king is looking very exposed right now. Nepo tries to run away, and we have rook d7, cutting off more squares for the black king. And it wasn't actually the best move in that position. The best move would have been b4 and then rook d7. But Hikaru does it this way. Knight f3. Now we have b4, and now it's mate and 4 from this position. I'll give you a second if you just want to have a look at that. So rook h5. This is actually where Nepo resigned. But what would happen in this position? There's not much that black could do here. If black plays knight into g5, just to delay the inevitable, and there's nothing really that can be done. E3 and then rook c5 is checkmate. And there you have it. And Hikaru is the 2022 Fischer Random World Chess Champion. And he picks up a winner's check of $150,000, which is not too bad for a few days' work. Thank you so much for watching today's video about the Fischer Random World Championship 2022. If you liked today's video, then please consider giving us a like or subscribing to our Global Chess channel. Leave a comment if you have any feedback on this video or the new structure of the Top Gear style intro. If you like that, please let me know. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.